Well guys, welcome back to the BVM Super Bandit build or assembly, whatever you want to call it. We found some awesome parts, so we'll talk about that first. But we're back at the aircraft. We have 3 weeks before this thing needs to be in the paint shop. So we do have a deadline. We're going to be rocking and rolling on this aircraft. Thanks guys for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Let's dive in. All right, so last video it was quite a few videos ago. Hey, that's a nice looking Rebel in the background there. Very nice. We were looking for the elevator clamperoo things here, and we found them, which is awesome. Actually, the owner found them, which is great. So thank you for all the efforts in finding these little pieces. Saved us a bunch of work trying to make these things. We actually, yeah, anyways, I won't bore you with the notes on this, but we did find the pieces, which is super cool. So what that means is we're gonna continue back with the manual, and that means we're going to the tail section of this aircraft. We were kind of jumping forward and skipping over the tail, but we are going to dive back into the tail of the Super Bandit. Okay, so anybody that is following along with this, it's nice to be able to go through the manual the way we were kind of starting off going through the manual, and we'll be able just to continue with that method. So we did get our intakes done, our fuel pump mounting done, and then we came to the stab installation. Now, I think we skipped over the stabs, and yes, we did go to this section here, which is our F6 former, yeah, F6 former and elevator mounts. So we got that stuff done in the last video. Now we're hopping back to the horizontal stabs, and we'll continue on with this stuff right here once we get the horizontal stabs done. So that's what this video is going to be focused on, is this stuff right here. All right, so first major step here is putting all of our holes into the fuselage, cutting out the holes on the side, all the holes, basically, all that stuff. So we're gonna work on these first 3 steps right here and get those accomplished first. All right, so we're just going through all the surfaces and fuselage and opening everything up here. I'll show you the Dremel bit that I like to use for this. It works so well. It's very accurate. So we've opened up the one stab here. You do need to sand down the center kind of lumps on the stab. These are sitting proud of the root of the stab, so those all need to be sanded down. Otherwise, it's not going to sit against the fuselage properly. So we got that other one to do. And then we're here on the fuselage. So there's an example right there of the back hole that the main steel rod goes through. So this is the bit that I use. I think it is a 1/8 Dremel bit. It's a carbide bit with a rounded tip. The nice thing about this is you can plunge it into the hole there, it goes through nicely, and then you just gently open up the holes. The little bottom pieces here, I take our plane and just scratch the pimples off, and then that leaves a nice black little indent, which is really easy to either drill through or again use the Dremel and just pop a hole through. All right guys, and I'd like to bring up today's video sponsor. Today's video has been sponsored by Temu. Now, Temu is an online shopping app. All the stuff is extremely affordable. And I actually first heard about Temu when my daughters told me about the app, and my daughter actually showed me some of the earphones that she ordered, and I was super impressed. So I went online and I ordered a bunch of stuff from Temu. Let's open up the bags and see what I got. This is actually pretty cool stuff. So some of this stuff will relate to planes. Some of it won't relate to planes at all, but I like this stuff. It's pretty cool, and I've already opened some of this stuff up. All the prices I'll list as I'm going through this stuff, and it's all in Canadian. So first thing we got is this really cool adjustable flashlight, pretty slick unit. And I've already opened this one up because I was really excited to take a look at it. This one's hard to show you, but it's a LED light strip for behind TVs and stuff. So, I mean, it's just a package of lights, but they're pretty stinking cool for the price. All right, another weird one, Velcro straps, a whole bunch of Velcro straps, a bundle of these things. Again, this does relate to plane stuff, but pretty cool stuff. All right, so I needed some shorts, so we got some new shorts. I know you probably can't see these because, of course, they're camouflage, but shorts. More shorts. Very cool. Ripstop nylon, very, very nice. Ooh, this one I was most excited about, and I opened this one up and I've already used it. This is a hair trimmer. I actually needed one of these. My other one that I use on my face and stuff was already conked out. So this thing was, when I saw it, I was like, super cool. It's worked great so far. I've actually been using this for a couple weeks and it's awesome. All right, this is a cool one, a screwdriver set. This is like a 150 piece screwdriver set. I've received one of these before from one of my friends, Kelly, and when I saw this on the Temu app, I ordered another one because you can never have enough of these things. So many cool bits in there. Airplane related stuff, we got a bundle of zip ties. Super cool, really affordable. A 50-foot garden hose. This is one of those retractable garden hoses that slinkies up really, really short when it's not under pressure, but I saw it on there. We needed one for the shop, so I ordered one. Ultrasonic Pest repellers. These things are super handy if you've never used them before. I have these throughout my house. We live in the Timbuktu, middle of the field type stuff, so very helpful. So that's the stuff we got from Temu. Now you guys have a special opportunity to get a bunch of discounts. So if you don't have the Temu app, there's a code listed down below in the video description, also the first comment of this video. It's going to be a link to download the Temu app, and if you use that link, you'll get a $100 coupon bundle through that link. So it's really important you use that link down below in the video description or in the first comment of this video. So if you guys already have the app, go to the app and type in my code, which is DKE8297. This will also bring up most of the items that I just talked about here and that we went over. So lots of cool things here, and there is the picks from lighter side of RC. All right guys, and thank you Temu for sponsoring today's video. Guys, if you're looking for good items at good prices, check the links down below and check out the Temu website. Thank you. Let's get back to the build. So we've got all of our holes cut where we need to. The only one that's left to do is the center line one for the tail cone, tail piece mounting. But it says to do that once F8 is installed. So we're gonna leave that aside right now, put a star beside it. Next thing to do is cut the elevator off of the horizontal stab. So we do have our line already marked out here on both of the stabs. So we wanna make sure we get that taken care of, and probably gonna use a pull saw to get that done. Not quite sure if we wanna use an X-Acto blade. We might use an X-Acto blade. I'm gonna figure that out and I will let you guys know what I decide to use here. We may just put a ruler up there and then use an X-Acto blade to cut it off. Okay, so we got our elevator surfaces cut out there. We basically used a combination of just a straight edge here with cork on the back, a ruler, and a big X-Acto blade. So just cut through it multiple times, and we finished it up with a pull saw to get through the other side. So that worked out good. Elevators are now separate. Next step in the manual is to work on the root. So we need to take our Dremel bit and just sand off all the lumps and bumps on the root of the horizontal stabs. So this is where things get fairly technical on the build side of things. So we have, let me grab this one here. So what we've done is follow the instructions first of all. So we hold the template that comes with the kit. You hold it up to the steel rod and you kind of get your drill bit installed. You drill a hole through here. You kind of get it initially set up and then you drill through the wood structure that's right inside there. So that's number one. Now this goes in kind of at that angle right like that. So it does bottom out on the leading edge of the stab. Now what you do is you're going to install this. It's bottomed out there. We have to do some sanding on it as well. But you've got this to use as a guide. So you're going to do a couple things when you glue this in. Number one, this gets it in the correct position forward and backwards. But then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get it in the correct position up and down. I know this is kind of hard to show you, but we're going to get it in the correct position this way, right? So it's important to use the template, use your eyes, get it as accurate as possible. You do have some play in here, and of course you could make more play if you need to. But that's what we're looking for. So we're gonna do a couple extra things here. Number one, we're gonna sand the pin because that's the gluing surface. So you fill this entire area with high sol. We're gonna go a step further, and where the, let me see if I can get it on camera there. So in that hole right there where the pin goes through and touches the leading edge, we're also gonna make sure we put epoxy into that area as well. So the tip of this will be glued in, plus the whole root. So we're going a little bit above and beyond what the manual says, but that's what we do. And so we're gonna get the epoxy installed first, get the pin installed, get it all lined up, use a bit of CA to hold it in the proper position while we're holding up the template here. When that's done, then we'll go in and we will epoxy all around that pin. So that's the process we're going to use. This is going to be the last thing we do tonight, is getting these pins installed and set in place. So we've got the anti-rotation front carbon pin all glued in place, and we were very generous with our aero epoxy. So you can see there we've got that whole section completely filled. The front hole as well too. That may not show up so well on the camera, but very generous with the epoxy. So we're gonna let that cure overnight, and we'll come back and continue on with the horizontal stabs tomorrow. All right, so our stab gluing the next day worked out awesome. Let's look at the next step. All right, so the next step here involves our main bracket piece and our holders for our horizontal stabs. Now, we are gonna have to upsize our holes a little bit because we're using more heavy-duty versions of these things. So you can see there, we've got, I think it looks like a 632 thread, and that looks like a 440. So we've got to upsize those to fit our bolts through the appropriate holes. So we've got all of our brackets installed here. Now I did have to cut each one of these bolts going into the brackets. They were a little bit too long. I think previously these brackets were mounted in maybe a wood version of this. They were quite a bit thicker, or the material it was mounted to was quite a bit thicker. So not a big deal. We cut each one of them and they fit perfectly. So we installed the surface through the two clamps while all these bolts were loose, tightened up the clamps for the surface, and then came in and tightened up our 4 bolts there. Now, there may need to be some adjustments to all of this, but at least right now, our 2 clamps per side are lined up. There's like 0 space to move in the actual holes. The bolts that go through fit it perfectly. So that is about as good as it gets. Now, we do need to sand down the bottom section here where the washers are sticking through, and probably the clamp right there. So I'm going to sand those down, but we are none of this is Loctited yet because we want to check and make sure that the fit is actually good. So I've left the little center clamper off. What I'm going to do first is just check the fit of all of this before we put the center clamp on, because we probably have to pull this out and do some adjustments to it anyways. So that's what we're working on now. All right, so one more problem revolving around these horizontal stab mounts. So the original ones were designed, they were a hole, and there's a set screw that came through the bottom that held that in place. These ones here, of course, we're using a pinch system, and all of that now becomes longer in the entire assembly. So I've already sanded the carbon down. We are tucked very close to the back here. You can see there we're almost touching. And if I hold that in place, we still have a whole bunch of space to make up. That's a problem. And there's a shot of the other side. So the only thing that we can conceivably do is sand these guys down as much as possible where they're contacting the fuselage. We've got a fair bit of buildup here in this corner, so we're going to sand that out a little bit with the Dremel just to get rid of the extra goop and see if we can provide enough space to come all the way back. Now these holes that we've already put on the bottom here to do the set screws up, of course, those are now in the wrong spot. So we need to fill those and redo those, but number one, we need to actually make sure that we can get this thing fitting in the fuselage. Dang. All right, so I've spent some time working on this side here, and we've got it fitting well, which is the right side of the fuselage. And before we did the other side, I just want to show you guys what exactly we were doing here. So kind of a few things. Number one, starting at the forward point, is getting rid of a little bit of the carbon. Now, we actually had to get rid of a lot of carbon to get this thing to even fit, but fine tuning, we got rid of a little bit of the upper part here. And depth-wise, a little bit on the face of the outside clamp. And then this part of the clamp right here, top and bottom, because this tucks into the fuselage. So that is what it looks like after we've sanded it, and it's fitting really well now. And that's the stock one. So you can see we've got sharp edges here, sharp edges here. So that's the stuff that we need to get rid of. So we're gonna do the same thing to this side to make it fit. All right, so we've done a bunch of sanding here to make this sort of fit, or at least get close to this point. Now, one of the things that was kind of important here that I missed was the fuselage was kind of squished this way. So this seam right here was actually pushed down and overlapping. So the fuselage, if you were to think about this like a circle, it was kind of oval or egg-shaped up and down. So I pushed this section back up, CA'd the joint here just to hold it in place. And one of the telltale signs was there's a massive gap underneath this carbon here, which there now no longer is. The other telltale sign was when we put the tail on like this, the bottom portion there was sticking way past the tail cone. Now it's not lined up, so don't judge my position now, but it was sticking down about 1/4 inch to 3/8, so very substantial, and we needed to fix that as well. So as soon as we push this up, it expanded the sides of the fuselage out, which is good. Now, a couple other observations here is, if you look at this angle right there, you can see that it's got a bit of an angle like this. So these stabs, the tips have a bit of a downward angle. I'll show you guys on the plans. This side right here, it looks like there's a massive gap on top there, and there's a problem. Well, this side here isn't angled like this, it's angled straight up and down. So if you're trying to make this made up with this at the end, you're going to end up with a huge difference in angle. So this is not super accurate, but if we go to our vertical stab position there, we've got roughly 0.20 degrees. We go to this stab here, I think it should be roughly 4.3, so about 4 degrees. We go to this stab in its current position, and we've got 4 degrees. So we're very, very similar, but you can see our massive gap on top. So that's gonna have to get filled. Well, the reason I'm sharing this with you is you wouldn't want to take this and be like, okay, I'm not going to measure any of these angles, I'm just going to mate up the base. No, 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 you don't want to do that. That's very important that you don't do it that way. Okay, so looking at the plans here, this gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. So there's the carbon piece we were just looking at. You can see they kind of have a downward angle, okay? Now, here's the telltale sign right here. So if you look at the dihedral setup, the wings are kind of angled upwards a little bit, and the tail is angled downwards a little bit. So if we were to mate those surfaces up, that one side is going to completely disappear behind the wings. So there's some obvious reasons to make sure you look at your plans. All right, so in order to get this kind of lined up and solidified, we need to be able to tighten up our stab mounting points here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my drill bit and just put a hole where we actually need a hole opened up. In the fuselage, we're going to add our second holes on the underside of the fuselage, so we have access to these bolts to tighten them up. All right, now I don't know if the dihedral is going to show up on camera here, but what you're looking at is when you look underneath the fuselage, you can see the tail right there, and what you're doing is you're lining up both sides when you look down the center of the aircraft. So hard to show you on camera, but that's what we are looking at. Oh, I think I might have got it right there. That's close. So that's what we're looking for. So this is all just supported in place right now. It's a little bit deceiving when you look at this section right here. So the bottom edge is touching and there's a massive gap on the top, but the bottom edge is flush and touching. So we can pull that leading edge in a little bit with the front pin and the wood block that holds the front pin in, but it's nowhere near this side here. Now this side we can pull that front edge in as well. So really, really close as far as the dihedral goes with the tail. The next thing we need to do is to get those front pins temporarily installed. I think that's what we're doing next. All right, so we're really close to being able to glue this, spot glue this stuff in. We got to take this piece back out and put our tail cone support piece on before we think about gluing that piece in. So we are still following the instructions. It's a little bit slow in this section, but we are getting into tack gluing F8 former into the fuselage. Other thing we're going to do when we take this out is we're going to sand the fuselage. We've got to remember to do that. Just remember that this point in the manual, they're not telling you all those small details anymore. You're supposed to just assume that you know what you're doing. So we're going to mark this former, sand out the fuselage down here, and then we're also going to sand out the fuselage where the vertical stab mount ties in as well. All right, so one of the downsides of the way we did this, because we were missing our pieces, is putting the F6 former, I think that is, and our elevator mounts in, because what that did was block off our access to get our vertical installed, our vertical support installed. So before we put our stab mount in, we want to get our structure installed on the vertical stab support. So what I've done here is sanded out the carbon. We tapped our 4 holes with a 256 tap to allow the bolts to screw in. Now I've put some high sol on this, and we are going to get that screwed in place with our aluminum mount on the front side, I guess, or what's going to be the back side of the aircraft. So the carbon, when this goes in, the carbon's going towards the front. The aluminum mount for the vertical is going towards the back. So I'm just getting this glued in place because once this horizontal piece is installed, getting this in and out is going to be pretty much impossible because we need the full space here to get that out. So this is our mount for the vertical, and the bolt here goes on the left-hand side of the fuselage, so it's going to go like this, up and down. All right, so we are jumping ahead a little bit here because obviously everything we've talked about with the vertical. So we have opened up our lightning holes on the fuselage. Those are done here. You can see we've also sanded down the center joint as well to get rid of the little raised section on the center. We've opened up the hole in the vertical stab and again sanded down the center joint. All right, this has been a ton of work getting to this stage, guys, but the stabs are ready to spot glue. This has been a lot of work. So our front maple blocks are installed and they're spot glued in place. The back carbon former there is not glued in place. I've got the wrench or channel lock pliers sitting underneath that side, just adding a little bit of up pressure to level those guys out. And right now, it's going to be hard to show you, but if you look at the stabs compared to the wings where the flap aileron joint is, it is perfection. So that's what you're looking for. Unfortunately, our gaps, like I've already talked about, are really terrible on the top side. The underside are really good. So the underside is tight, and this is the side that had the angle that matches the stab. This side here, the angle is pretty much straight up and down. That's why we've got that big gap there. So anyways, we have a method to fill those up. No big deal at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to spot glue this piece in place and just let that set up a little bit before we do any moving. and then we will get our other piece, our forward, I think that's the F7 former, glued in place. All right, I know it seems like we're spending so much time on this stuff, but this is such an important step. So we have spot glued everything in the back here together. We've taken the channel lock pliers out, rechecked everything, and it is bang on perfect. So what we need to do now is we need to take the stabs off so we can get that other former for the vertical stab installed. Okay, so we've spot glued the former in for the vertical stab. Now it's a so-so fit. I'm not overly impressed with it. Like the width here, kind of in the midpoint, doesn't really match the fuselage. So we'll make it fit as best as we can, or we have made it fit as best as we can. And we'll have to do some filling like all the other surfaces, but this side's flush. This side has a little bit of a ridge. The front there is hanging over, but it still rotates because it's only in the one main pin. So it's so-so, but we'll make it fit nice by the time it's done. So we're gonna pull this guy out, and we need, as a last step tonight, to glue all of those things in place so we can continue tomorrow. All right, guys, it is the next day, and our glue is, it's still sort of tacky, but it has obviously set up. But everything looks good. I just put the stabs back in last night just to have it sitting comfortably. So with all the previous stuff we did, it seemed like we were going fairly slow, but we actually made a whole bunch of progress, which is really nice. So we jumped through all these steps here, and basically we are on the forward fin mounting step. So that is the forward bolt of the vertical stab. So first thing to do is make a drill hole straight up and down as it's mentioned, and then we are going to find the aluminum tube and start working on this. I'm assuming the aluminum tube is in this bag right here. I think that's it right there. Okay, so we're going a little bit above and beyond our stab mount here. Now there's a balsa block in here that's about the thickness of my finger. So what they're wanting you to do is to install the aluminum tube. This little piece here sits on, goes in there, and then that balsa, the carbon piece sits on top of the balsa block. Now when you tighten this down, the balsa block would be taking the force. Now I'm going to go one step further, and we're going to put a carbon channel the same depth as the balsa block. So I've gone and drilled this out to 7/32, which is the same size as the aluminum tube, and right now our piece of carbon is installed, and it's right at the top of the balsa block. So what I'm going to do is mark this out now. We'll pull this out, and then we're going to put this filler in the balsa block. Now we may go one step further and put a brass tube inside the carbon tube. I'm going to see how the fitment with everything is, but that is what we're doing here. Now probably going to go that route just so there's no side-to-side play, but step number one, let's get this piece of carbon fit first. So pretty much what I do here is just take my paint marker, mark that guy out. I know that I need to be on that other side of the paint mark, and it'll be a good cut. Okay guys, this is going to work out beautiful. So we've got our carbon tube, our brass tube, which takes up the same height as the balsa block as discussed. We installed the aluminum tube with the carbon fiber plate. That is sitting in there, and we've got our bolt put through, which is a 440 bolt, and that's now holding everything in alignment and in place. So what we need to do now is we need to glue the aluminum tube in. So we're just going to spot glue it with some CA first of all, and then we're going to put a bunch of epoxy in this area. We are going to obviously, and this is covered in the manual, but you're going to want to cut the aluminum tube off, but we want to make sure that we're nice and solid first. So we're going to get that all taken care of and get the glue installed. Okay, so we've got our aluminum tube all glued in place, so we just need to let that cure and do its thing. We don't want to start cutting that tube off until everything's cured. So we're going to set that aside now and move on. We could probably do the bolt and everything, but again, we're going to hold off a little bit until that epoxy sets up. Okay, so next thing we're jumping to is the aft nozzle installation. Now we've done all of the steps that we're skipping over here in the manual. So those steps are all the elevator servo mounts. So we've already installed this former here, F6 former, our elevator mounts. That was all done previously. So that's all signed off and complete. Elevator push rods, we've left that for the assembly portion. We do need to do that, but we'll do that after the aircraft's painted. So moving on to the aft nozzle installation, we're going to pull out our parts and start working through our steps here. All right, so initially the nozzle here fits like crap, to be quite honest. The shape is not very good at all. So first thing we're doing here is we're gonna fit the top. So we've installed the tab onto the cone or nozzle as instructed. Leave 0.7 inches sticking past. And we've taken this off now once just to add more sanding. So what we're doing, initially sitting on here, the cone was sitting quite high, or sorry, quite low. So sanding more of the cone away brings it higher and brings these areas in line. We kind of have to work on this cone in bits and pieces. So we've got a couple things going on here. Number one, we've got the tab on the top. We've got the little tips that stick through the side here, and then we've got the bottom piece down here that mounts on and holds everything together. So lots of different steps, but you have to go through these one at a time to make sure it fits properly. Okay, so let's talk about this exhaust cone here, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. So our top piece is screwed in place. We're glued on the tail cone side, we're loose on this side, but we've got our two screws. So up here we are nice and flush. Now if you look at the bottom section here, we are sticking out on this side and we're shy on this side. So what needs to happen is our whole tail cone piece needs to come over this direction. So if we do that and hold it right there where we're level, now what's happening is we've got a huge bump on this side and we've got a huge indent on that side. So what we're going to do to try and fix this is our intermediate pins, you can let go, are going to go where these black marks are. So one on this side, one on that side. So we can get this section lined up perfectly because it's symmetrical to the fuselage right now. So if we do our pins, then what we can do is try and get the bottom part shifted over. So then what we can try and do is shift our bottom section over. Now I don't think we're going to get any movement with that former piece glued into the front part of this tail cone. So what we'll do is we'll put a couple of relief cuts in the former work. We'll get that part shifted over, get our little pin in the bottom dealt with and glued and everything, and then we can go back afterwards and glue those pieces back in place to make the former work solid again. So our next thing we're working on here is the pins for the middle part of the exhaust cone. All right, so we've got our pins installed on both sides of the fuselage here. So I have undone the screws on top, and you can see there it fits very well. So what we did is we adjusted these pins so this is very nicely fit, very flush at the pins. Now we're a little bit high on the fuselage side in this area. I've done a little bit of sanding here and that brings it really close. So that's all a step in the right direction. Last step on these pins is we installed the backer plates right there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to aero epoxy the backer plates, aero epoxy these pins in place, and that'll be kind of the last step for tonight. And then tomorrow we'll start working on getting this bottom section fit, which I think is going to be the biggest challenge of this all. All right, final step for tonight. We got our pins glued in right there. We glued in the little receptacles on the exhaust cone, and we are going to let that cure overnight. All right, so it's the next day. We're going to start working on the bottom portion of our cone here and try and make this fit. So first thing I'm going to do is cut some relief cuts into this bottom former work. So I'm going to do a little bit of shaping here maybe, or thinking about this, but I think we're going to put a relief cut here, maybe down there, because I don't think this shape needs to change, but we need some movement in this section right there. So I'm going to add some relief cuts and we'll see how this all works out. Okay, so this might give you guys an idea here of what we're accomplishing with these relief cuts. So now we have the ability to move this bottom section side to side, and you can see the relief cuts opening and closing there. So now hopefully this will be able to fit perfect. Okay, so right now we've got the bottom portion over here where my hand is proud of the fuselage. So I'm going to push this over, and if you guys watch closely on the relief cuts, you'll see the right hand one at the top opens up, and the the top one on the left closes up. And this allows the whole bottom section to swing left and right a little bit. So what we can do now is we can clamp this thing in the right spot, and we can get everything fastened up, and our fuselage to tail cone will be nice and even. So we're all lined up and glued now, and this worked out well. So what we did was we put a, well, number one, I got lovely wife to help me push the exhaust cone in and put some tape across there. While we were doing that, we also added a clamp on the joint here on both sides, and that brings everything into alignment. So once that part is done, what we did was install the pin back here. So this is the rear mounting portion. A little bit of a janky setup because you got plastic going into plastic or carbon or nylon or whatever, but it will work. We have a bolt going through the bottom here. Now one thing I did, where that little pin goes into the receptacle, I added a little U-shape receiver portion for this bolt to hold that pin in nice and snug. So we did that first, and then we put some CA just to tack glue this in, and I pushed up the bottom of the tail cone here to line it up with the bottom of the fuselage, because the tail cone was sticking down further than the fuselage. So we needed this to come up a little bit. Put some CA on there, tack glued it, and now what we'll do is we'll go in with some aero epoxy, and we will glue that bottom portion onto the fiberglass. The other thing we're going to do is the relief cuts, now that we're set in the right spot, we're going to take some epoxy and we're going to just lightly fill in those relief cuts. I want to make sure that we don't go all the way through to contact the fuselage portion, so we're just going to keep that fairly light. But we want to fill all those up at their current angle just to hold everything in place. So once we get that stuff epoxied in place, we're just going to leave this in its happy spot where it is. Don't touch it, just leave it the way it is, and we will come back to this. So here's a final shot of the pin glued in place. So of course we've CA'd the pin, but we've also gone back and high soled it all. And then our relief cuts. So the relief cuts, all I did was take some high sol and run it along the relief cuts with my finger. You can see the high sol is now in between the relief cuts. So when that cures, it's going to be nice and strong and fill all those little gaps depending on whatever size they're going to be. So we're just going to leave this as it is now and let it cure. All right guys, a little hard to see that on the white background, but that is the Super Bandit tail pretty much wrapped up. We've got a couple small things to deal with the rudder mounting or vertical stab mounting, but we made some wicked progress in this video. One of the common things that everybody asks, how much time does this kind of stuff take? So as we go through this build series, I will share my time with you. So up to this point, right now, the end of this video, we are at 61 hours of shop time to get to this point. So I think we're probably going to end up around 100 hours-ish. We'll see. That's my guess anyways, to get this plane ready for paint. We do have a deadline for this aircraft, end of September. We have to be ready to deliver it to paint. So that is our goal. We are making some really good progress. Next video, we're going to start to get into the surfaces. So the horizontal stab, actual surfaces, the hinging, the rudder, and then as a final step, the plane finishes off with the wings. Now we do have a bunch of things coming up on this plane, like dealing with all of our joints. That's a huge one as well too. Not overly exciting, but I guess it does kind of finish this plane off. We'll probably end up doing that as kind of a last step. So that's it for the Super Bandit, guys. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. hit that subscribe button down below if you're not a subscriber already. And don't forget to check out the lighter side of RC after dark. We do a lot of behind the scenes stuff. If you're interested in that, we usually do a live stream from that channel, usually every 2 weeks from here at the shop. So check it out if you're interested. It's kind of a unique way. You can also interact with me during the live stream, ask questions, stuff like that. So thanks guys for watching, and we will see you in the next video.